Good afternoon. Welcome. Yeah. Thanks. We're going to get started. My name is Deborah Gonzalez. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Public Policy Institute of California, or PPIC. For those of you who are not familiar with PPIC, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit with offices both in Sacramento and San Francisco. Today's event is part of our James Irvine Foundation briefing series, and we'd like to thank them for the event and obviously for the wonderful lunch. For today's program, we're going to hear from PPI researcher Lunna Lopes, who will share with you our recent findings on PPIC's latest survey on Californians and education. You should have received a handout with highlights at the front desk, but if not, we can get those to you. They're also available, the slides for the presentation, the survey, and the highlights are available online right now at ppic.org. We'd like to also thank the Dirk and Charlene Capsonell Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the Silver Giving Foundation, and the Stewart Foundation for their support of the survey. After Luna's presentation, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. A few more things before we get started. Later today, you're going to be surprised about this, but the survey team will send you a survey request about the survey, because that's what they like to do. So please fill that out. We do make adjustments to the program based on your comments. And I'd like to mention two upcoming events that we have on the schedule. 1 week from today, we'll be back in this room doing another education event. We'll be focusing on student achievement and growth on the California's K-12 assessments. And on May 11th, over at the Sheraton, we will be hearing from, we'll be featuring an event with Tom Steyer, a business leader and a philanthropist. Please go online to register for these events. The events are filling up quickly. So also, can you please turn off your cell phones? Just a couple of days ago, my husband and I got to spend a joyous time driving out to West Sac to pay our taxes. We owed. It was not a fun time. We also have kids in college. It's really sad. But it actually brings to mind that we are today going to talk about the single largest expenditure of the general fund, our K-12 system. And while the governor's budget is projecting an all-time high of $73.5 billion for our K-12 system, it really may not be a significant amount when you look at the size and scope of California's education system. California's K-12 system serves roughly 6 million students at 10,000 plus schools, and these students are taught by 300,000 teachers. We have one of the largest school districts in the nation in the LA Unified School District, but we also have some of the smallest school districts in the nation. My favorite school district name is the Little Shasta Elementary School, which only serves 6 kids. By all measure, California has one of the most diverse student populations in the nation. Nearly half of California students speak a language other than English in their home. To top it off, in the last few years, the California system has undergone some significant changes. We've shifted to new standards, we have a new testing and accountability system, and we have a new funding system, the LCFF formula. So it's appropriate today that we ask Californians, how do they feel about the K-12 system? Do schools have enough funding for all students? But specifically, do they have funding for students with disabilities? And what they know about all these changes in the systems, or as Lunna will tell you, what they don't know about these changes. And of course, no poll would be complete today without focusing on some of the implications of federal changes that may be occurring. The poll asks some important questions about federal immigration policies as it relates to schools and about school choice vouchers. While discussions about the K-12 system are relatively quiet at the Capitol, I'm a former legislative staffer, so it's fairly quiet at the Capitol on K-12 issues right now. I want to remind you that next year will be the first year in a while that we will have a superintendent race without an incumbent. And while schools generally get a good grade in our report, California still has some concerns. I want to mention to you again, it's my favorite thing to mention about our polling, all our crosstabs are online. Regions, age groups, and such. And there's some concerns that you can see in those, particularly about funding, accountability, and a concern about whether schools are preparing students for the jobs and workforce. And so these issues may become a significant part of the superintendent race, and it may be a race to watch as we go forward. With that, I'll bring up Lunna. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you all for being here today. So I'm going to start just by going over PPIC's statewide surveys for those of you who might not be too familiar with it. I also want to thank my fellow survey team members, the President, CEO, and Survey Director of PPIC, Mark Baldessari, our Associate Survey Director, Dean Bonner, and David Cordes, who's a research associate with the survey team as well. So the mission of the statewide survey is to provide timely, relevant, nonpartisan data on political and social and economic opinions of Californians. And we hope to inform and improve the state policymaking process and encourage discussion. And really what our aim is to provide a voice for all Californians on important state policy issues and debates. Since 1998, we've interviewed more than 330,000 Californians, and we've conducted over 160 statewide surveys. I'd like to thank our funders for this survey. This survey was conducted with funding from the Dirk and Charlene Capsnell Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the Silver Giving Foundation, and the Stewart Foundation. Just to cover, what we're going to kind of go over today. The first section looks at perceptions and attitudes towards some education issues. This includes approval ratings of the governor and the legislature, some questions on school quality, immigration policy, vouchers, charters, and Common Core. The second section focuses more on funding and policy preferences related to funding. So we look at the adequacy of funding, resources, the level of resources for students, LCFF, LCAP, and also preschool education, which is being talked about in the legislature nowadays. The survey was conducted from April 2nd through April 11th. We interviewed 1,700 adults, and among those, we have 529 parents with children 18 or under in the household, and 411 public school parents. All right, so first, starting with, the governor's approval. 49% of adults and 52% of likely voters approve of the way Jerry Brown's handling his job as governor. And approval was somewhat higher, actually, in March, when we had 58% of adults approving of his overall job performance. And so today we actually see that the level of approval for his overall performance is similar to what we found last April. And when we ask about approval of how the governor's handling the K through 12 public education system in California, approval is somewhat lower, as you can see. And about 1 in 3 Californians say they don't know. And this is generally the case when we ask about approval on specific issues. So we see that with higher education and the environment and things like that, higher levels of don't know. So moving to the California legislature, 49% of adults and 52% of likely voters 44% of likely voters approve of the way the California legislature is handling its job. And as we see, again, overall approval higher than approval on how the legislature is handling the K through 12 public education system. And for both the governor and the legislature, Democrats are more likely than independents and Republicans to approve. So next we asked Californians to rate the quality of public schools in their neighborhood today. So we asked them to give their local public schools a grade, and we found that most parents, adults, and public school parents actually give positive ratings of their the quality of their local public schools. So a majority of adults give an A or a B. And as you can see, across racial and ethnic groups, there are some differences, with African Americans being far less likely than other racial and ethnic groups to to give their local public schools a grade of A or B. Also, this is a question that was asked of adults nationwide last year in May by a Langer research survey, and they found that 48% of adults nationwide gave their local schools a grade of A or B. So Californians, a little bit higher than adults nationwide on this issue. So next we asked Californians how they feel their local public schools are doing in terms of preparing students for college and in preparing students for jobs in the workforce. So we found that almost 6 in 10 adults and 7 in 10 public school parents say local public schools are doing an excellent or good job in preparing students for college. And notably, we found that Latinos are the most likely across racial and ethnic groups to say that their local schools are doing an excellent or good job. Then when we ask about preparation for jobs in the workforce, we see that that's a bit lower. So fewer than half of adults say that public schools are doing an excellent or good job in that area. And I will say that public school parents are more positive than adults overall. So 6 in 10 public school parents say that their local schools are doing a good job in preparing students for jobs in the workforce. So California is facing a teacher shortage, and we wanted to ask respondents if they thought teacher quality was a big problem, and then we asked them if they thought a shortage of teachers was a big problem. And we see here that only a quarter of Californians think teacher quality is a big problem facing California's public schools today. However, when we asked about teacher shortage, you see that half of Californians say that that's a big problem. And so there's definitely a sense there that quality of teachers is not as much of a problem as the actual shortage of teachers. And we see that African Americans are much more likely than Latinos and whites and Asian Americans to say a shortage of teacher is a big problem. And across political parties, Democrats and independents are more likely than Republicans to say that there's a big problem when it comes to teacher shortage. I'll just also note that when it comes to teacher quality, fewer than a third across age, education, and income groups say that that's a big problem. So really, the focus here of the problem seems to be on the shortage of teachers. So amid increased federal immigration enforcement efforts, we wanted to ask Californians how concerned were they that these efforts will impact undocumented students and their families in their local public schools. And we found that 46% of Californians are very concerned that these efforts will have an impact, and another 24% are somewhat concerned, while 3 in 10 are not too or not at all concerned. Public school parents hold similar views. We found that 6 in 10 Latinos are very concerned compared to half of Asian Americans and fewer African Americans and whites. Across political parties, Democrats are more likely than independents and Republicans to say that they are very concerned. And across the state's regions, we found that residents in Los Angeles were the most likely to say that they are very concerned about this issue. So next, the legislature is currently considering a bill that would make California a sanctuary state, and State Superintendent Tom Torkelson encouraged public school districts to designate themselves as sanctuary safe zones. So we asked Californians if they, favor or oppose their local school district designating itself as a sanctuary safe zone to indicate that it will, protect undocumented students and their families from federal immigration enforcement efforts. And we found that 2 in 3 Californians and about 3 in 4 public school parents are in favor of their local school district designating itself as a sanctuary safe zone. Majorities across regions favor that their local school districts designating themselves in that manner. However, partisans are very divided on this issue. So 79% of Democrats are in favor of having their local public school district designate itself as a sanctuary safe zone, while 70% of Republicans are opposed. So it's kind of opposite sides there. We also asked Californians if local public schools should require staff to keep information about the immigration status of students and their families completely confidential. And we found that 73% of Californians and 81% of public school parents think that information should be completely confidential. And we also found that among parties, there's really high support among Democrats and independents for keeping that information confidential, and also 51% of Republicans also think that immigration information about students should be completely confidential. So next, given the changing federal policy landscape under the new Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, we wanted to ask a few questions about school choice programs such as vouchers and charter schools. On the issue of vouchers, we found that 60% of Californians and 66% of public school parents are in favor of providing parents with tax-funded vouchers to send their children to any public, private, or parochial school they choose. So the last time we asked that question was in May 1998, so quite a ways back, and we found similar levels of support. So at that time, we found 58% of adults and 67% of public school parents said that they were in favor of charters. Republicans are more likely to favor vouchers than independents, and far more likely than Democrats. And we found that majorities across racial ethnic groups are in favor, though African Americans and Latinos are more likely than Asian Americans and whites to support vouchers. So turning to charter schools, according to the California Charter School Association, 1 in every 11 public school students in California attends a charter. So we asked Californians if charter schools should have to meet the same educational standards as other public schools, and found that 6 in 10 say that they should have to meet the same standards, while about 1 in 3 say that they should be able to set their own standards. This is, again, a question that was asked last year of adults nationwide, and they're more divided on this issue, with 48% saying that charter schools should be able to have to meet the same standards, while 46% say they should be allowed to set their own educational standards. So this year, we continued tracking awareness and favorability towards the Common Core state standards. And 7 years after California joined a number of other states in adopting Common Core, just 1 in 4 Californians have heard a lot about the standards, while another 41% have heard a little. 1 in 3 say they have heard nothing at all about the Common Core state standards. Public school parents are somewhat more likely to have heard, a lot about it, more about it than adults overall. And across political parties, we see that Republicans are much more likely than Democrats and independents to say that they've heard a lot about the Common Core state standards. So next, we asked, Californians if, based on what they've read or heard, do they favor or oppose the Common Core education standards? And we found that 43% of Californians favor it, while 35% are opposed, and 22% are unsure, so they say they don't know. However, public school parents are more supportive, so 54% of public school parents favor the Common Core standards. There's a sharp divide among party on this issue. You see Republicans are much more likely to oppose Common Core than Democrats and independents. And looking at different educational income groups, we found that support for Common Core is highest among those with less education and with lower income. So next, we're going to kind of delve into funding and LCFF and LCAP questions that we asked this year. So this is a question we've been asking for quite a few years, and it's, do Californians think that the current level of state funding for their local public schools is more than enough, just enough, or not enough? So here we found that solid majorities of adults and likely voters, so more than 6 in 10, say the current level of state funding for local public schools is not enough. And public school parents have similar views, with 69% saying there's not enough state funding for their local public schools. And the responses were similar last April when we asked this question. Majorities across racial and ethnic groups say funding is not enough, although African Americans are the most likely to do so. Despite the sense that state funding is not enough, when we ask Californians what is the best way to significantly improve the quality of K-12 public schools, is it increasing state funding, using existing funding more wisely, or a combination of both of these measures, we found that only 14% think that more funding alone will improve school quality. About half of adults say that both approaches are needed, so we need more funding and better use of existing funds. And we found that a third of Californians say just wiser use of existing funds alone is needed to significantly improve the quality of public schools. So last year in 2016, Californians passed more than 200 local school bond measures, and we also passed one statewide bond measure, Proposition 51, to fund school construction. So we asked Californians if there was a local bond measure for school construction on the ballot, how would you vote? And today we found that 2 in 3 adults and a majority of likely voters say that they would vote yes if there was a local school district, if their local school district had a bond measure on the ballot to pay for construction projects. Majorities of Democrats and independents say that they would vote yes, but a slight majority of Republicans actually say they would vote no. And we also asked about a potential parcel tax for public schools, and majorities of adults and likely voters say they would vote yes on a local parcel tax. However, local parcel taxes require a 2/3 majority to pass. So looking at statewide, a bit short of that. And as you can see on all of these, on both of these measures, Republicans are far less likely than Democrats and independents to say they would vote yes. Next, we wanted to know if when it comes to serving low-income students, English language learners, and students with disabilities, do Californians think that their local public schools have enough resources for these students? And we found that majorities of adults and public school parents say local public schools do not have enough resources for low-income students. Similar majorities of adults and public school parents also say schools do not have enough resources for students with disabilities. However, when we ask about English language learners, adults are split on whether there is not enough or just enough resources for these students. There are some significant partisan differences in the perception about resources for all 3 of these student groups. So Democrats are the most likely to say that that schools do not have enough resources to serve these students, followed by independents and Republicans. So for all 3 of these, that's the case. And looking at these same questions across racial ethnic groups, we found that African Americans are much more likely than Latinos and Asian Americans and whites to say schools do not have enough resources for low-income students and for students with disabilities. Notably, across all racial and ethnic groups, the view that resources are not enough is lower for English language learners than for the other 2 student groups, low-income students and students with disabilities. So this year, we again tracked awareness and attitudes towards the local control funding formula. Nearly 4 years since it was signed into law, most Californians have say they've heard nothing at all about LCFF. We found this since we started asking this question in 2014, that awareness of LCFF is very low. So today, more than 6 in 10 Californians across regions, age, income, racial ethnic groups all say that they have heard nothing at all about the LCFF. However, when after being read a brief description of the policy, nearly 2/3 of adults and public school parents say that they support the policy. Support for LCFF was somewhat higher last year when 76% of adults and 77% of public school parents favored it. But you see across regions, after being read a short description of LCFF, there's majority support for it across all the state's regions. But we also wanted to know do Californians think local school districts that receive the additional money for lower income students and students who are English language learners, will they actually spend the money on those students? And we found that 53% of adults said they were very confident or somewhat confident that the school districts who receive this additional money would spend it to provide resources for these students. So we also want to know if Californians think LCFF will help English language learners and low-income students improve their academic achievement. And we found that 2/3 of Californians think that it will at least improve somewhat. Across Asian ethnic groups, Latinos and Asian Americans are more likely than African Americans and whites to expect improvement. And we found that majorities across regions and demographic groups expect at least some improvement, though expectation of academic improvement decreases as age and income rise. And the LCFF requires that school districts develop, adopt, and update 3-year local control and accountability plans. And as part of the LCAP process, districts are required to reach out to parents and are encouraged to seek input, particularly from low-income and English language learner parents and students. So we found that 46% of public school parents say they were provided with information about how to get involved in their district's LCAP process. Notably, we found that Latino public school parents are far more likely than white public school parents to say they have received information, which kind of implies that that outreach to English language learners and low-income students may be occurring. In our April 2015 survey, we asked parents if they had been involved in their district's LCAP, and we found that 82% of parents said that they were not involved. So today, instead of asking if they were involved, we asked, okay, well, how likely are you to participate in the updating and the revision of your school district's accountability plan? And positively, or maybe optimistically, we have 25% of parents, public school parents, say they're very likely to participate. 47% say they are somewhat likely. So finally, we asked about the importance of preschool education. So there's some conversations in the legislature about early childhood education and providing preschool education for California 4-year-olds. The Assembly Speaker has launched a commission on early childhood education. And when we asked this question about how important is attending preschool to a student's future success in kindergarten through grade 12, we found that really overwhelming majorities of Californians think it's very or somewhat important. And this holds true across the state's regions and really across all demographic groups. We also asked, if Californians would favor the state government, or if the state government should or should not fund voluntary preschool programs for all 4-year-olds in California. And here we see 75% of adults and 71% of likely voters think the state should fund that. How we're going to pay for that, that's a question we did not ask, but we see some big differences here along parties, but compared to other issues, it's really striking that in an age where it's hard to find majorities across parties agreeing on something, majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and independents say that this is something the state should do. So finally, just kind of going over some of the key takeaways from our survey, we found that a majority of Californians really give their local public schools positive ratings, though there is a sense that the current level of funding for public schools is inadequate. And that's kind of been an ongoing sense since definitely since the recession. Californians are concerned about the impacts of increased immigration efforts and the impact that might have on undocumented students and their families. And majority do actually favor their local school districts designating themselves as a sanctuary district. We also see that when asked just, if they support or oppose vouchers, there is some support for vouchers among Californians. And most Californians think that charter schools should have to meet the same educational standards as other public schools. Many Californians feel that resources for low-income students and students with disabilities are just not enough. That sense is a bit lower when it comes to English language learner students. Though few have heard about LCFF, so that might explain why there's the sense that resources for these students is not enough. But when presented a short description of the policy, most are supportive of the local control funding formula. And lastly, as the legislature and policymakers, deliberate on the importance of and the role of the state in providing early childhood education in California, this is an issue that seems to cross party lines and demographics. There seems to be support for early childhood education in California. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take the questions. You can wait for the mic and somebody can come to you. Any questions? Yes?
When you asked, most agree that we need more funding, did you ask anything? Oh, I'm sorry. Did your question indicate a willingness to pay
Right.
for that additional funding?
Right. So we asked. So that funding question came from is a state funding, whether state funding was enough. We asked more about obviously if you'd be willing to pay vote yes on a local bond or on a parcel tax. So that's obviously local funding measures for schools. So that's kind of where we focused on in terms of willingness to pay. Any other questions?
Any questions in the poll about teacher tenure, Viguera decision, et cetera?
No, we didn't touch upon teacher tenure. There's as I'm sure you all know, there's a lot of educational issues. We tried to cover as many as we could, but we're just limited in terms of the number of questions we can ask. To keep not a lot of people want to stay on the phone for 20 minutes, so even
On vouchers, I know you guys hadn't tested it since obviously a long while. Any other state polls or national polls you've seen on vouchers?
Not that I've seen. I think there might be some national polls that are gonna, might start coming out this year on vouchers, given the change in kind of the federal direction. But over the last few years, given the stability and having a Democratic administration, and being with President Obama being reelected, there weren't at least too many polls that I saw that really touched upon the issue of vouchers.
And the idea of accountability plans with parents and the school boards, and the idea that the majority of would rather have better use of funds in the schools than more funding. There's no parents and interested people, well, that's the point, interested, don't have the knowledge. They don't have the ability to understand what these plans should be. And also, the problem is funding in the school districts. What is it? 40% of all new teachers quit in 5 years, or is it 50% quit in 4 years? That's a huge, huge problem, and it probably goes on in the minority districts because there's more work to be done with those children that are not English speaking in the home, etc. And what does that say about the state's 5th-year plan to create teachers? If vast numbers of them, huge percentage, quit in 4 or 5 years, that is a huge problem too, as I said.
Well, and we see that overall, people are aware of the teacher shortage as a big problem. And looking at, that's why we ask kind of about quality of teachers and the shortage of teachers. Really, there's not a sense that, bad teachers are a big problem, right? The big problem that I think Californians notice is that there's a shortage of them. So, we hope that, policymakers can use some of this, information. But I think that, it seems like the public is aware that, there is a shortage of teachers and they are concerned about it, so. Yes?
Two questions. Thank you so much for your presentation. First one is, are you in a position to talk about the relationship between the quality of education in a school with parent engagement? Is there a relationship between those two? And then the second question has to do with your survey. Is there a specific reason you choose to do it in April?
There's no. We started it in April, and we like to try to keep this is the 13th annual survey on K through 12 education we've done, and so we like to try to keep it consistent as much as possible. And that's why we typically do it in April. But in terms of the relationship between the quality of schools and parental involvement, we didn't really ask enough questions to really get at that. And there's also a difference between quality and the perception of quality and things like that. So we didn't really delve too much into that.
So I have a question about the 7 in 10 Californians who have heard nothing about LCFF.
Mm-hmm.
Have you asked this question before, and has that number been different?
We've asked this question since 2014, and it's always been very high, of saying they've heard nothing at all about it. So it doesn't seem to really be something that's that most people are consuming in everyday kind of media coverage. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. Have a lovely evening.